Redeemed, how I love to proclaim it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through His infinite mercy, His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, His child and forever I am. His child and forever I am.
The Church of Christ in Canada welcomes you to our program today, Key to the Kingdom. The title of our lesson is The Woman at the Well.
Welcome again today to our program. We certainly are happy to have you with us. As we continue in our study of the unfolding plan of God, we're looking at this point at the life of Jesus on earth. We want to touch on some of the high points of His life. Over the last 3 weeks, we've talked about the love of God that was demonstrated through Jesus as He was willing to come and give His life for us. There are many other interesting events that take place, teaching that Jesus does, miracles that He performs, that we are going to see in the Gospel of John. Today we come to the 4th chapter to talk about the woman at the well, and to see, if we can, some of the great lessons that we learn from that particular event in Jesus' life. If you want to open your Bible with me to John chapter 4, we will begin by reading there the first 4 verses. The Pharisees heard that Jesus was gaining and baptizing more disciples than John, although, in fact, it was not Jesus who baptized, but His disciples. When the Lord learned of this, He left Judea and went back once more to Galilee. Now He had to go through Samaria. Here in this text, John tells us, he brings in the Pharisees again, who were most unhappy with Jesus for everything He did and said. They found fault with everything. And now they are hearing about Jesus' work, and He's hearing about the number of people who are following Jesus, who are being baptized. In fact, that Jesus baptized more than John. Now, John himself, the writer John, the Apostle John, he goes on to tell us that indeed Jesus was not doing the baptizing. He wasn't actually doing it Himself, but His disciples were doing the baptizing. But at least it was going on. And so when Jesus heard about this, heard about the disturbance or the concern, we would say, within the Pharisees, He decides that He will go back to Galilee. And it's interesting in the text that we just read that the statement is made that He must go through Samaria. Now, if you look at a map of Israel in Jesus' day, you'll see that at the top of it, at the northern area, is Galilee. And the southernmost area is Judea. And the area in the middle is Samaria. Now, it's significant, I think, that John makes the point that Jesus had to go through Samaria. Now, the Samaritans weren't particularly liked by the Jews. Even though they were a mixed race, they were partly Jew, they still were not accepted. They were not loved. Jesus went to Samaria, I believe, to give a message to the Samaritans that He had a concern for them. He had an interest in them. by going through Samaria and bringing to this woman the message of the truth of the gospel, Jesus showed that He loved them and was as concerned about them as He was His own people, those who were purely Jewish in their heritage. Now, where did this prejudice come from? Why was there this prejudice against the Samaritans? Samaria is that region, as we said, between Galilee and Judea. It was where these people who had been, who were of mixed blood, it was where they were living. In Old Testament days, when the northern kingdom of Israel, with its capital at Samaria, fell to the Assyrians, many Jews were deported to Assyria, and they were there for quite some time. According to 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 24, King Sargon of Assyria repopulated the northern kingdom with captives from other lands to settle the territory and to keep the peace. These captives eventually intermarried with the few Jews who remained in the land, and the result, of course, was this mixed group or mixed race of people. The Jews who lived in the southern kingdom felt that these Jews who lived in Samaria, that they had really betrayed their people. They had betrayed their nation and had betrayed their God, I suppose, in the sense that they had intermarried with these people who did not observe the law necessarily, and people who were not included in the law as far as the Jews' law was concerned. And the hatred continued down through the years, and continually they dealt with these kinds of issues of unhappiness. In Ezra chapter 4, beginning at verse 1 and reading through, Ezra has returned from captivity in Babylon and has as his goal to see the nation of Israel reestablished in Judea, to see the temple rebuilt, to see the law observed, and so forth. And in that text, we're told that they had opposition from those around them. And so they were a people who suffered a great deal by the persecutions that came on them. And so the Jews faced that kind of thing as they tried to rebuild the land. And then when the land got rebuilt, you had this deal where you had the Jewish people, the people who were certainly fully from the lineage of Jacob, who were in the north, and those who were fully through that lineage in the south, were divided here by this people who were of mixed race, partly Jewish, partly Gentile. And we're told that many times people who were traveling, Jews who were traveling from the north to the south or vice versa, would cross over the Jordan to the other side and move up and around Samaria rather than go through Samaria. That's just how strongly they felt against them. So that kind of sets the situation. Here is Jesus. He's coming along. John says he has to go through Samaria. And I believe the only reason he had to go through Samaria was to meet this woman and to share with her the hope of the gospel. And rather interesting how that it all unfolds. I think probably one of those familiar stories is that of the woman of the well. But I think if we only see a happenstance meeting of Jesus with a woman and asking for a drink, we've really missed the point that's there. So let's go back to our text from John chapter 4 and look at verse 5. So he came to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired as he was from the journey, sat down by the well. It was about the 6th hour. So as they are making this journey, they come to this area in Sychar where Jacob's well is, a very famous, a very important well that went back to Jacob himself and was treasured by the people as a place for getting the water they needed to sustain life. And so here Jesus sits down and is resting. Now it's noon. It's the hot time of day. And so his disciples, they go off into the city to get some food. Now as Jesus is sitting there, then the story continues to unfold. Verse 7. When a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Will you give me a drink?" His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. So here, as the woman comes out at noontime to draw water, Jesus asks her for a drink. She is surprised at that. Surprised that he asks. But before we get to that, let's think about the fact of the time of day and the fact that this woman has come at this time of day to draw water. In fact, we know that she could have gone to a well that was closer to her than Jacob's well. We know that. And we know that women generally drew water later in the day when it was cooler. And yet here she has come at this time of day to draw water, when it is indeed the hottest time of the day. That leads us then to the question, why? Why has she come at that time of day? And we're not told exactly. She is a woman who has a reputation that we're going to find out about later. And so maybe she came at that time of day, and maybe she came to that well, which was a little further away from her own home, so she didn't have to face the women who might be there drawing water, who might have comments to make about her and her character and the kind of person she was. We don't know that. We're not told exactly why she went at that time. But that certainly is a reasonable possibility. But Jesus then asked her for a drink. We had a lesson a few weeks ago where we talked about Jesus being human. And this is an example of the humanity of Jesus. Jesus was a man. He had been walking in the hot weather. He came to this well tired. He needed a drink. He didn't have anything to get the water with, and so he was kind of at the elements as far as what he could do and couldn't do. And so this woman comes, makes a perfect opportunity for him to ask for a drink. Now, to say that this woman was surprised is an understatement. Let's go back to the text at verse 8. Verse 9, actually. The Samaritan woman said to him, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink?" For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. Jesus answered her, "If you knew the gift of God and who it is that asks you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water." "Sir," the woman said, "you have nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. Where can you get this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob, who gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did also his sons and his flocks and herds?" Jesus answered, "Everyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again, but whoever drinks the water I give him will never thirst. Indeed, the water I gave him would become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life." So, interestingly, Jesus, why did Jesus ask her for a drink of water? Because he was thirsty. But also, I believe, as we've talked a little bit about the idea that John said he had to go through Samaria, this is why he was there, to make this contact and to be able to talk with this woman. As you look at the text that we've just read, verse 8 through 14, we know that there are a lot of things in life that make life happy. The fact of security, food, love, being loved, having approval. These things are important to us and help us deal with life. But there's one thing that's the best there is for quenching thirst, and that's a nice cold drink. When I was a kid living in Ohio, we used to every once in a while go up to my uncle's who lived up in West Virginia. And at his place, they didn't have running water. In fact, they didn't even have a pump there, but they went out to a well out in the yard and got water from there. And I can always remember as a kid, when we were going to my uncle's, it was exciting, especially in the summertime. Because, we'd be playing and ripping and carrying on, and so you're thirsty and you're looking for a drink of water. But the water that we got out of the tap in the small town we lived in couldn't compare to the water out of that well. It was so nice and cold and fresh and refreshing. And we may drink a lot of things for thirst, but most people, I think, agree, if they're willing to be honest about it, that there isn't anything quite like a nice cold drink of water to quench the thirst. And this lady, when she hears what Jesus says, that he could give her water that would keep her from being thirsty, she was excited about that. She thought of what Jesus was talking about as being something that was a physical glass of water that could quench her thirst forever. For us, in this country, when we want a drink, we just go to the tap and turn it on. I mean, there are some people, I suppose, who live in various places in the country that don't have running tap water, but most of us do. And it's no big deal. We just go in, turn the tap, get our glass of water, and away we go. Or today in our country, you go buy a bottle of water and carry it along. I've said many times, I wish I had come up with the idea of putting water in a bottle and patenting it, because I would be an extremely wealthy man now, as you see all of the bottles of water that go along these days out of the stores. But this woman, she thinks about that, And for her, getting water is hard work. And so give me some of this water that I may never thirst again. So Jesus has to explain to her what he means. Because you know and I know that he's not talking about physical water. So let's go back to John 4, down at verse 16. Here Jesus continues his conversation. And it's interesting that he changes the subject. You know, she wants to know about this. She wants to get this water. You know, she's confused because she doesn't know how he's going to get the water. I love that in the story. You know, she says, "Well, you know, are you greater than Jacob? How are you going to get the water? You don't have a bucket. You don't have a rope. So how are you going to get it?" But boy, she was interested just the same. And so Jesus says, verse 16, when she says, "Give me of this water," he told her, "Go call your husband and come back." "I have no husband," she replied. Jesus said to her, "You are right when you say you have no husband. The fact is, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you now have is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." So, wow. Here, the response that Jesus gives to her isn't, you know, here's what the water's all about. I'm going to explain it to you. Now, we know, don't we, because we know the end of the story. We know the end of the plan of God to provide for our spiritual cleansing and to take away our thirst for evil by giving us a thirst for the righteous things of life. But she doesn't know that. And so her view is this water that's going to take away her thirst, and she's going to be fine. But when she says, "Give this to me," Jesus said, "Well, you go get your husband." And her response is, I don't have a husband. And then Jesus points out, and that's true. You know, you're telling the truth there. You don't have a husband. You've had several, but now the man you're with isn't even your husband. So, look at her response to this. Going down to verse 19. "Sir," the woman said, "I can see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem." Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming, and has now come, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is a spirit, and His worshipers must worship in spirit and truth." I find that kind of astounding. That this conversation has gone from, "Will you please let me have a drink of water? Will you please give me a drink of water?" to, "Why would you talk to me because I'm a Samaritan, and a Samaritan woman on top of that? And if you had known who it was who was asking you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water, and you would never thirst again. Let me have some of that water." Jesus says, "Go call your husband." They have that little discussion. And then here we come to the point where the woman says, "Well, now thinking about that, I'm not sure how she went from that point to the next point But she says, let's think about that a minute. What about where we worship? We worship in the mountain here. You guys worship in Jerusalem. So what's right? What's the proper thing? What do we need to do? And it's here then that Jesus is going to actually get to preach the sermon that needs to be preached. That he can share with this woman the wonderful glory of God's blessings on not just the Jews, not on just the Gentiles, but on all mankind. So next week, we're going to look at this very interesting question or very interesting statement of Jesus when he says, God is a spirit, and he commands those who worship him to worship him in spirit and truth. Join us again next week as we continue to look at the unfolding plan of God and glorify in the beauty of worship in spirit and truth. Being God's lighthouse in the storms of change is the theme for a Men's Day being hosted on Saturday, April 9th, by the Fenwick Church of Christ at the Wellandport Community Center, which is on Regional Road 63 in Wellandport. Registration is to begin at 9:30, and then there will be 4 sessions during the day, wrapping up about 3 o'clock. Lunch will be provided, and so registration is needed. To register, call 905-386-6916 or email to donhipwell@gmail.com. And they ask for registration by April 2nd. The speaker for the day is Scott Laird. He presently is minister at the Great Falls Church in Montana. He's an excellent speaker and will be one you will enjoy and benefit from the good lessons that he will have to present. And so, the Fenwick Church invites all men who want to be better servants of God to join them that day. Again, note the phone number and email address and register so lunch can be provided. And plan for a great day of spiritual enlightenment and fellowship.
Redeemed, how I love to proclaim His, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through His infinite mercy, His child and forever I am. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, redeemed, His child and forever